In the early morning hours of June 6, 1944, over 800 C-47s carried thousands of young men on their way to drop behind enemy lines to begin the liberation of Europe. Well, what if you found out you were the last person to fly the lead C-47? We're going to talk to that guy today in the hangar. Hello, welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Christy Wong. Today's episode sponsored by Gold Seal and iFly GPS.
Okay, today is special because we're going to be talking about June 6, 1944. I'm a big World War II aficionado. I was born on June 6, so D-Day has always been really special to me. So I am thrilled to have on the show today Doug Rozendaal. Doug, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
It is so nice to meet you, by the way. I got just a glimpse of your story ahead of time, but I didn't want to learn too much because I wanted to save it, but I'm already fascinated.
All right, so Doug, as we saw in the tease, what we're talking about here is a C-47 that was the lead ship that fateful morning. And a C-47, what exactly is that? Because some people may not even understand.
Well, the C-47 is the military version of the DC-3, and basically it's the airplane that made commercial air travel in America possible. And I started flying DC-3s in 1986, hauling freight. I got the job because I had a strong back and a multi-engine commercial license, which were the only requirements. And I've been flying them for a long time. And about 20-some years ago, a friend of mine bought one and called me up and asked me if I'd train him, which I did. And we air showed the airplane. I flew with him some, and we just had a great time. But he kind of scratched that itch and decided he was going to sell the airplane. He called me up and he said, "Why don't you buy my DC-3?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I don't need it. Secondly, I can't afford it, and I've got no place to put it." And he said, "Well, then would you come to Arizona and fly it back to Oshkosh, because I've sold it to Basler. They'll probably convert it into a turbine." And I said, "Sure." So we went out there and woke it up. It'd been sitting for a few years. Woke it up, flew it to Oshkosh, flew great, landed it. Fast forward about 7 years, and I'm sitting at my desk one day, and I get a phone call from the president of the Commemorative Air Force, who said, "Doug," he said, "we think," I was on the board of directors, and he said, "we think we found the lead airplane for D-Day." And I said, "Where at?" And he said, "Well, it's in Oshkosh at Basler Turbo Conversions." And I said, "Which one?" And he said, 847. And I said, "Well, I flew that airplane in there about 7 years ago."
Wow.
And it was a great connection. And I'm not ashamed to say I had, tears in my eyes when I walked away from it, knowing that this is it. It's going to get cut up, stretched, put turbine engines on it, and that's another airplane lost to history. Sadly, or fortunately, that didn't happen, and we found it. The Commemorative Air Force bought the airplane. We raised the money. We restored it to brand new condition with the ultimate goal of flying it back to Normandy.
When you dropped it off to Basler, they were going to cut it up. How come they did it just sit there for 7 years?
Yeah, it sit in there. They've got a yard. They've got several airplanes up there. So when they decide they're going to convert another airplane, they kind of go through them and look at the one that's got the least corrosion and it's going to be the easiest to do. And
so every time it was just lucky that they,
right.
Okay, not this one today. And
right. It was almost lost to history.
Wow. Okay. And before we get back to the plane, real quick, tell me about the Commemorative Air Force.
Well, the Commemorative Air Force is the largest flying museum in the world. We have about 170 airplanes scattered all across the United States and in some foreign countries, and we fly these airplanes as a tool to tell a story. Our history, these airplanes played a pivotal role in the reason why we live free in America. And, it's trite but true that the history we forget, we're bound to relearn. And the price that was paid in World War II is so horrific that America could be free. It's a travesty to lose that history. And so that's our mission. The airplanes are exciting, and they're alive. And you can go to a museum and see a stuffed tiger, but that's not what a tiger is. And you can go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and see a DC-3, but that's not what a DC-3 is. A DC-3 needs to be a living being, and it has a personality and a smell, and so I'm pretty passionate about that. And at the CAF, that's what we do. We keep these airplanes alive as a tool to tell a story, so our young people will be excited and maybe want to learn more about the role these airplanes played in our freedom.
How long have you been involved with the CAF?
The company that I was flying at DC-3, the owners were CAF guys, and I went down to visit them in 1989. So, 33 years, public school math, but yeah, 33 years.
Yeah, wow.
Okay,
Been
so
the greatest experience of my life. I've got to fly incredible airplanes and meet some just lots and lots and lots of our heroes have become personal friends. And so it's been a fantastic experience. And, there's a CAF chapter wing squadron near just about everybody. So we'd encourage people to go out and join and get involved. And you too can be a part of our organization and help carry these stories forward.
Yeah, how can some of our viewers get involved with the CAF?
CommemorativeAirForce.org.
Okay.
Go there, check it out, and then go find your local chapter. And
okay.
we'd love to we need members.
All right, so we'll put a link down below, and they can click on that. All right, the CAF bought and restored.
So we bought the airplane, we raised the money and acquired the airplane, and the goal was the 75th anniversary of D-Day.
Okay.
And so we had a timeline, and we knew that we couldn't restore the airplane in that timeline with volunteer labor. So we aggressively raised money and were able to hire Basler turbo conversions to put the airplane through essentially the process that they put a turbine conversion through. So it's a brand new zero-time airplane when it comes out. So in February of 18, I got to go back to Oshkosh, and the previous owner and I flew it in there, and about 10 years later, I got to go back and do the initial flight on the airplane, and what a great loop that was and it's like accepting a brand new DC-3 in 1937 at the Douglas Air Flight in Santa Monica. I mean, it's a brand new airplane.
Wow. Did you get to fly it over to Normandy?
Yes. Yep. So that was the goal, and then we started, putting some time on the airplane, shaking it down, developing confidence, working out all the squawks, again with the ultimate goal of returning to Normandy. And so there's a group called the DDay Squadron. Now we call ourselves the DC-3 Society. And a guy named Eric Zipkin up in Connecticut, he was the quarterback of that deal. And we put together 15 American DC-3s, and we went back, 15 American airplanes, went back to celebrate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And I got to tell you, it was just incredibly humbling to be a part of that group. Here's 15 volunteers, mostly, some private owners, some museums, but all volunteers that went out and raised somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 for each airplane to fund that trip.
Wow.
And on their own, and we took 15 airplanes across the North Atlantic, followed the same route to the same destination that those kids did 75 years ago. But I'm here to tell you, what we did had nothing in common with what they did.
Right.
All right? They took off in a DC-3 from Goose Bay, Labrador, headed for Narsarsuaq, Greenland, and they had a star dome in the top looking at stars. They were all fresh out of training. They were lucky if there was 500 hours of total time in the cockpit combined. We had 50,000 hours of flight experience in the cockpit.
Wow.
We had a bucket full of GPSs and even more batteries. And the trip was as easy as flying from Dallas to Denver. It was effortless. So the weather was good. We were looking at 3 different computer models. I started studying the weather 3 months previous.
Oh, wow.
And I looked at the weather in Greenland
Right.
and across the North Atlantic every day, because I wanted to learn how those weather patterns, because I know how the weather works in the upper Midwest, but I don't know how the weather works in the North Atlantic. So, I was watching the weather. There's an app called Windy, and we had 3 different computer models on there, and I learned how they would be different at the start, and they would merge as you got closer to the date. And it was just dead accurate. We knew where the ice was, and we didn't have any de-icing. And the other thing we left about 10 days early, so everybody had the opportunity to kick the can if we didn't like the weather. And again, it was an easy trip, but it was still exciting. Going into Narsarsuaq, if you haven't read Fate as a Hunter, you have to read that book. Again, just eloquently describes what it's like to fly in there and land uphill and turn around and take off downhill. And It was an incredible experience, but effortless. So, we met in Connecticut, and we all got to know each other and started flying together. Then to Presque Isle, Maine, which is, again, that was the launching point for all these airplanes in World War II. This was called the Blue Spruce route. From there to Goose Bay, Labrador, Narsarsuaq, Greenland, Reykjavik, Iceland, and Prestwick, Scotland. And it took us about 4 days to get across. We sent airplanes in waves. The hardest thing was fuel. Nobody's...
Oh, yeah, those places aren't going to be ready for a big fleet.
Right. And so, Narsarsuaq could only handle about 3 airplanes a day, and they had a 750-gallon fuel truck.
Oh,
so
my.
every time an airplane showed up, they had to go refuel, and they were fueling the truck out of barrels that we had purchased 9 months previous
And stored
shipped in a boat and had been stored there. And so the logistics of this are just incredible. And then Iceland's a beautiful place, highly recommend it. It was a great time. On to Prestwick, and then we did an oil change, and we ended up in Duxford. And Duxford, if you haven't been to Duxford, it's an incredible place. It's one of the bases where they launched airplanes to go to Normandy. And spent some time there. They had an event. We flew around a little bit in England. And finally, June 5th. So when we went over, we had been told that we probably wouldn't be able to fly on the 6th of June because the U.S. and French presidents were going to be there at the American cemetery. And
TFR.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, real TFR.
The biggest of TFRs.
Right. And, but so the plan was on June 5th that we would fly paratroopers. I don't know, I think we had 8 airplane loads of paratroopers.
Wow.
That would fly from England and drop them in France. And oh, by the way, be sure and take your passport.
Oh, right.
Most of them didn't, but that's a whole nother story.
They didn't in 1944.
Right, they didn't in 1944 is true. So we flew them over and dropped them, and then we went to Cone, France. And about 5 days previous, the word come that we were going to be able to fly on D-Day. So that was the ultimate thrill. And we flew up the coast with 15 American airplanes in formation, and there were, all kinds of military airplanes as part of the event, high stress, timing, all the other things that get involved in that. Flying over Normandy, and we did several flying. We hauled in the area, and we hauled a lot of round chute paratroopers, and it's a fairly small place, but you just think about what happened there that day. I mean, they landed 140,000 people on the beach.
Wow.
And behind enemy, the paratroopers went behind enemy, 13,000 paratroopers behind enemy lines to prevent the resupply
Right.
of the kids walking on the beach.
And most of those, the jump zones were missed. It was cloudy. They had all sorts of trouble.
Right. But you realize it's a fairly small area, and you've read about it, and again, I too am a bit of a historical geek, and so it was really a tremendous experience to get to experience it firsthand.
Wow.
How old was the average age of some of those pilots on D-Day?
Well, you could, anywhere from, Doolittle was in his mid-30s, and he was the old man in the Doolittle raid. So very few of them would have been over 25, my guess is. I don't
21,
know.
22, and old enough to have gone through some training for about 2 years and then put into those planes.
Wow.
It's just, there's so many emotions that the courage that Eisenhower had to turn the switch on and say, knowing full well that thousands of American were going to be killed on that day.
Yeah, he wrote his he wrote out a speech on a failure. Right. And had that ready to go in his pocket.
And everybody said it. Never before and never since has there been an invasion of that mass. And it speaks to the American exceptionalism and the cooperation that we had with our allies. It was just an absolutely incredible experience to be a part of it.
Speaking of cooperation with our allies, you got to fly a lot in Europe. Yeah. What was flying with this whole situation? What was flying in Europe like?
So, You know, we hear about flying in Europe, and, you know, Martin is a friend of mine, and I've talked a lot about flying in Europe, and one of the reasons why Martin's here is because he can fly here.
He couldn't fly in Europe. Not easily.
Not
Very
practically.
restrictively.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, basically spent 6 weeks flying out of the U.S., you know, and the conclusion that I came to real quickly is it doesn't work. Most of the airplanes that you see on the airports in Europe are corporate airplanes, and a largest percentage of them are unregistered. Access to the airport is incredibly difficult. We did 2 operations at one airport, and the fees for 2 takeoffs and landings was $1,500.
Oh my.
Now, we're a large airplane, but $1,500 for 2 operations. And
Oh, you don't want to train somebody on touch and goes there.
and to bring a car on the ramp required a $250 permit.
Whoa.
To drive a car on the ramp. And so, you know, it's happening here, and it's insidious, and it's slow, and it's creeping, and the AOPA is putting a lot of effort into access. And, you know, everybody that flies needs to be a member of AOPA and support their effort.
So that answers the question.
We had an episode on is AOPA membership worth it? In my opinion, and you're just reinforcing that, is it absolutely yes, even if it was just for the advocacy.
Absolutely.
So I came home from Europe, and I called Mark Baker's a friend of mine, president of AOPA, and I called him, and I was fired up. and just said, we have got to work as hard as we can to stop this from happening. You know, there are great examples in America of major corporate airports where there's a GA gate that you can actually go, and you can walk through the gate and go to your airplane without having to pay a $75 or $100 ramp fee. And AOPA is working hard on a transparency program, I know, but that's just absolutely critical that we keep that access and keep that going.
Wow, that is so interesting. Okay, where is that C-47 today?
So That's All Brother is assigned to the Central Texas Wing in San Marcos, Texas. The CAF has a big wing down there, and it lives down there, and we're hoping that we'll have a good season with the airplane this summer. If things open up a little bit, we've got a lot of plans, but it's just hard to say. And it travels all over the country telling the story of, why we live free.
Yeah.
And, the courage that it took for a 13-year-old or 18-year-old kid to 16, 18-year-old kids in the back of a C-47 to walk across that threshold, that very threshold, into the deep, dark night, and not knowing where they were going to land or who was going to greet them is just an amazing story of American courage and exceptionalism.
Yeah, truly amazing. Truly amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for sharing that story. We'd love to have you back on the show and talk about a bunch of other stuff because your experience goes well beyond just this. So, I mean...
This is just the tip of the iceberg is what I'm learning.
Yeah, so I just met Doug, but I'll tell you, I've run across Doug's name multiple times as I researched some of the videos that we've done in the past. So your fingerprint has been on our stuff as we go about. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys for watching. And if you want to comment about D-Day and those young, brave men who took a big risk so many years ago, leave a comment below. And as always, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you guys next time.
In the hangar.